What are the best staples and hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh right now? The August 31st Forbidden List has created a huge vacuum in Yu-Gi-Oh where some of the best cards in the game you thought are no longer the best cards, and some other cards are actually crazy good right now. In today's tier list, we're going to be breaking down the most powerful hand traps and the most powerful board breaker cards in one tier list. You can pretty much call this a staples tier list. Let's go ahead and jump on in. And in today's video, I'm going to provide a guide on some cards that you should be playing for your deck. This is actually going to be a little bit different than our other tier list because there's so many cards to talk about. But let me know if you guys like this style of video, and if you want to see more amazing content, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can find out when I post. I think it's best to start to talk about the hand traps. To be honest right now, I don't think players can really decide if hand traps or board breakers are stronger. And I think it's mainly because Appaloosa, Bull of the Goddess, being banned. This card was the bane of hand traps. A lot of combo decks nowadays would solely focus on making Appaloosa, meaning that cards like Nibiru Primal Being, Effect Veiler, Ash were completely useless cards, and it actually dictated the tempo of when you would be able to activate said cards. But now that the threat of Appaloosa is gone, Yu-Gi-Oh is a lot more different. Hand traps are a lot more effective. And it also means on this tier list, effect negation is king. This means on this tier list, cards like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence are still some of the most play effect negation cards. It also means that if you can play Herald of Orange Light, you probably should be playing it inside of your deck. Unfortunately, not all effect negation is equal though. Cyframe Gear Gamma is a sleeper, really good at stopping effects, but since it's limited to one, it's an incredibly risky card. I know when Cyframe Gear Gamma was at 3, playing 3 Gamma in 1 driver, you would always draw the driver, but maybe if we played 3 driver and 1 Gamma, we'll always draw the Gamma. Don't try that. And Ghost Warner and the Moonlit Chill seems to be a little bit of an outlier. I'm actually going to go ahead and put this one alongside of Miradoria and Copium. Now, as you can see, effect negation is all over the place, and it's because these cards do different functions. While Effect Veiler, Infinite Impermanence, and Herald can pretty much negate at will, I think the biggest problem with Ghost Warner and Moonlit Chill is that it can only hit special summons. A lot of times in current Yu-Gi-Oh, you want to be able to hit the normal summon, and back then, the reason why we played Ghost Warner and Moonlit Chill alongside of other effect negation cards like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence is because of Snake Eyes. You typically would use your Infinite Impermanence or Effect Veiler on Snake Eyes Ash, and then Ghost Warner would be used on the follow-up card like Diabell Star, which is a special summon. I think with a little bit more deck diversity and the fact that you can't use Ghost Warner on your turn effectively, this card is essentially a card that you don't have to play. It's not really a factor. And as much as I want to say that Copium is way too low, when it comes to deck building, you really have to be precise with the cards that you play. So Ghost Warner could be effective, but would it be effective over some other cards that you can play? The answer is probably not. And now that we have effect negation out of the way, I think it's time to talk about our power hand traps. I've actually separated the hand traps into different categories. And with power cards, these are the cards that tend to be incredibly impactful in certain formats, or sometimes just not impactful at all. Basically, these are your boom or bust hand traps that are crazy good in the right situations. Of those hand traps, I would say Ash, Nib, Shifter, Mole Chummy, yes, it's a power card, and Droll are those cards. They can all provide a certain situation where Yu-Gi-Oh can be unwinnable for the opponent. Now, the trick about the power cards is that people often respect these cards. Players are always trying to figure out a way to stop these particular cards. Right now, because Appaloosa, Bull of the Goddess is banned, DDD High Wave King Caesar is the card that people are using to stop Nib, but in order to play this card, you need access to a Fiendsmith engine. And I'm not saying that people can't afford the Fiendsmith engine, I'm just saying you broke. And even with Appaloosa being banned, there still are other ways to play around it, but it's still one of those must-play cards. Nibiru can be a blowout. I would also say Ash Blossom and Dimension Shifter are also must-play cards. Dimension Shifter is incredible if your deck can afford to play it. Now, Molchumi Parelia and Droll and Lockbird, I would say 100% side-worthy. These cards aren't necessarily strong enough to be in the main board, but when they do come out, they are crazy good Yu-Gi-Oh cards. These cards are almost auto-win buttons against a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, but not against everyone, which is why you should consider placing them at maximum inside of your side deck for right now. Next are the Graveyard Disruptor cards, and I also forgot about Dominus Purge, which is similar to Ash Blossom, so I guess you could say it's a power card. I would put Dominus Purge in the sleeper because it's similar to Ash Blossom, but it locks you out of fire, dark, and water, so really hard to play. And in a format where Graveyard is still really prevalent, I would still say Psycho Reader is a little bit copium. This card could be good against Fiendsmith and even Drytron, which is seeing a little bit more play, but I don't think that it's better than some of the other cards here. Bystials are easily a solid choice, even with Fiendsmith receiving less power. These are still strong. Ghost Mourner is also a crazy solid choice card. This hits the Fiendsmith engine, it hits Yugioh cards in the graveyard, like Gruesome Gravesformer to summon its smoke, it hits Flame Beurge. This card actually has a ton of applications. I think Skullmeister is a sleeper because all of the card effects that activate in the graveyard, and DD Crow is definitely a safe card to put in your sideboard if you're not mainboarding the Bystials and for some reason can't play the Bystials. Now lastly will be the destructive cards. These are some of the very few hand traps that can actually do more than stopping a card effect. They destroy. And this list is decently small. Ghost Ogre is still pretty good against Tenpai, Yubel, and other face-up spell and trap cards that are prevalent. I think Typhoon is a sleeper. There are so many opportunities where you can activate this card. For example, if your opponent has Nightmare Throne, then Nightmare Pain and Opening the Gates can be destroyed. If your opponent needs with Divine Temple, then you can destroy any of their spell and trap cards, which could be Snake Eyes cards. It's also pretty decent against Centurion. And Sideframe Delta, I think, is another sleeper because there is a lot of powerful spell cards. There's really no other further explanation needed when it comes to talking about those particular cards. And there are 3 last cards that I kind of consider unclassified. It's mainly because I ain't gonna cap. I just started developing this formula, but I'm pretty sure as time goes on, I'll be able to perfect it. The last 3 cards we have is Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, which I think is a crazy good choice. There are a ton of Link summons going on right now. Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood is also side-worthy. This card is crazy good as well. And there's a decent amount of targeting without effect negation that can be used as follow-up. So Saravis is actually a sleeper. I especially love Fantastical Dragon Phantasme and Ghost Mourner. I think that those cards should be considered in just about everyone's side deck, especially if you know you're going into a big Fiendsmith format or basically against any deck that Link summons, or if you know that you're playing at an event that is time. Now lastly is pretty much the others. These cards really don't have a classification or anything, so I'm just going to show you where I put them at. Pretty much every single one winds itself up in copium. They are bottom tier cards. Now Chaos Hunter I put as sleeper, but it's technically situational. This could be really good if you're going against a Runic or if you're playing Chimera, which can summon this card fairly consistently without having the discard. But all of these cards on the bottom are just not strong enough to be able to compete in this format. Firecracker is crazy copium. Why would you play Firecracker when you can just play Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood? Now on to board breakers. This can get a little bit tricky because the general census for board breakers is that they're pretty good. And actually, I think that they're a lot stronger than what some people are going to give it credit. Because Yu-Gi-Oh! And the TCG has gotten rid of ultra oppressive cards like Baron de Flor, Borlo, Savage Dragon, and now Appaloosa, I think there's actually more time for these board breakers to be able to shine in the correct situations. Now keep in mind, I said correct situations. That's the same thing for hand traps. One of the hardest things about deck building is figuring out if your deck plays better with board breakers or better with hand traps, and that can change depending on the meta and the strategy that you're playing. I think a good general rule of the thumb is that if you're playing a deck that needs a lot of space for its engine, oftentimes maybe needs 2 or 3 cards to be able to play fluidly, board breakers is typically your approach. And this is especially true if you don't have enough slots to play a ton of hand traps. Hand traps will be a little bit stronger in more modernized Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks like Snake Eyes that can play 1-card starters, or strategies that can actually benefit off of slowing your opponent down with hand traps. Another thing I want to point out is that Pot of Prosperity has also been limited to 1, so this does make board breakers a little bit weaker. The previous argument is that if you play 12 board breakers with 3 Pot of Prosperity, the Pot of Prosperity could see your main deck engine, but could also be used for your board breakers. And saying that you start off with 6 cards in your hand, plus 6 additional cards seen, odds are you're going to see a board breaker. But let's go ahead and start off with spell or trap removal. I actually think that this should be the core thesis of the format. There are tons of Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies, Snake Eyes, Yubel, Centurion, that actually can be prone to a good board wipe at the right time. And with that being said, I think Harpy's Feather Duster is a great side-worthy Yu-Gi-Oh! Card if the situation calls for it. Cosmic Cyclone will also be side-worthy, and Lightning Storm does low-key fit the best of both worlds. It's a great side-worthy card. Twin Twisters gets a little situational. I wouldn't play this card, and it's mainly because you have to discard cards and it can be responded to. Like, imagine using Twin Twisters to be able to stop a Yugioh board, and then they use Desiree on the card. Now you're out of a card in your hand and your opponent stopped the Twin Twisters. But in some strategies, it can actually be good. Evenly Matched, I would consider as a pseudo back row removal card because it does that. I think it's also sideworthy. Back row removal can be really important depending on the situation, but I don't think that it's mandatory to run these inside of your main deck just yet. And to be honest with you, it genuinely depends on the deck if you actually even respect your opponent's back row. Some Yu-Gi-Oh strategies just simply do not care, and if you know any of those strategies, let me know down below in the comment section that doesn't care about Snake Eyes or Yubel or any other back row heavy deck. Some strategies have to respect them, and if you do, these are the cards that I would consider over everything else. After that, we have the Effect Negation Board Breaker cards. I think that Forbidden Droplet is a main worthy card. Yes, it does require resources like Twin Twisters, but the difference is if you send enough resources, your opponent can't stop this card. Easily a game winner in Yu-Gi-Oh! Same with Dark Ruler No More. I think these two cards can actually be used in tandem with one another. So what Yubel players have been doing is that when you activate a card like Dark Ruler No More, they will unchain Abomination as a trap card, then use Fiendsmith Desiree to negate Dark Ruler No More. That's when you can follow up with activating Droplets as a response, sending Dark Ruler No More and other cards to negate more of your opponent's card effects. So yes, there is a world where these cards can be used in tandem with one another, or you can just play these cards inside of your main deck even alongside of hand traps, because there are situations where you look at your opponent and look at the lines that they're going to make and you're like, I won't use any hand traps, I'll just break the board. I think that that level of play is really crucial in Yu-Gi-Oh right now, analyzing what your opponent starts off with and then either taking the risk and going with your board breaker approach or using your hand traps is going to be really important. With that being said, I don't think you can afford to trade 1-for-1s right now. I love Chalice, but I'm going to put it and staple the divorce papers together. And ironically, depending on the situation, I think Solemn Strike is actually a good card. One thing I genuinely want to drive home is that we do not have Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess. If you are playing a deck that can play on your opponent's turn incredibly well, being able to just set up a minimalistic board and then use Solemn Strike at the correct time is crazy good. And this card also stops summon. Solemn Strike is so crazy of a card, I think it can be game winning. The only problem is finding it in the appropriate deck so you can be able to use it to thrive. And now after the Effect Negation, we do have the Monster Interruption, which technically Solemn Strike can consider itself a part of. These cards are going to be able to help you break your opponent's board. Those particular cards are pretty strong. I think that Dino Wrestler Pankratops is actually a good side-worthy card. This card is stronger than Fiendsmith Desiree because it's typically played in defense and can't be negated by Desiree. I know I said I don't like 1-for-1 trading, but Dino Wrestler Pankratops can actually trade with a card effect and get rid of it, but it also can be a monster to get over an opponent's monster and get rid of something else. The fact that it's versatile too to be able to stop spells and trap cards, I think is crazy. Metaltronus, I think is really good in a format where everybody's playing the exact same cards, but outside of Fiendsmith, there's so much variance in the format, you really can't predict successfully what cards that you'll be able to Metaltronus. Simultaneous Equation Cannon is a complete god card for the correct deck. And I actually think that Ultimate Slayer is a good side-worthy Yu-Gi-Oh card. Ultimate Slayer in the correct situation can trade 2-for-1, which is incredible, especially if you combine it with cards like Forbidden Droplet. You can even be trading 3-for-2 while also getting into your engine, depending on what you send to the graveyard with Slayer. Super Polymerization, I would put as 100% situational. There's no inboards that we can naturally super polymerize, if that's even a word. So you're really going to need the dedicated deck. And I actually think that Raigeki is a fairly good card. We've seen the powers of Raigeki and Dark Hole in last format, especially with an opponent's exhausted board. This card in combination with cards like Dark Ruler No More is game ending. And keep in mind, Fiendsmith Desiree can't always be on your opponent's inboard if they want to respect Nibiru. So cards like this can go absolutely insane. And lastly, unfortunately for Blink Out, I think it only can trade 1-for-1 with monsters. It does have versatility, but I don't think it's good right now. That's my take on where I would put the Disruption cards. But what about the Kaiju Escalite cards? Being able to tribute your opponent's monsters or get rid of your opponent's monsters by using a monster has always been interesting, and Pank could have technically can be considered in there. I think Gamma Seal is that 1-for-1 trade, so doesn't do enough. Lava Golem actually trades 2-for-1, but forces you to give up your normal summon, so you have to be wary. Divine Incarnate Kirakara can be good in some decks, but you're gonna have to force a lot of interruptions, so that's gonna have to be very pliable. Alpha Master the Beast is one of my favorite cards, but unfortunately, it's not that guy. And the Golden Nugget is also a crazy good card, but has to be in the right situation. This card can be a blowout. Lastly is spell card Soul Exchange. I think that this card is a hidden gem, but for right now, I'm going to put my copium aside and put staple divorce papers together. Tributing your opponent's monsters need to be in the correct situation right now. You can't just give them a monster or summon a monster that has no purpose. But on the contrary, being able to take your opponent's cards is incredibly good, especially if they're not summoning monsters like Desiree or Verugis, which is limited to only so many Yu-Gi-Oh strategies. With that being said, I think Change of Heart, Snatch Steal is incredibly good, especially if your opponent does try to respect Nibiru the Primal Being by summoning Wave King Caesar. Being able to use that to take the Wave King Caesar can prevent them from Nibiruing you or summoning other monsters on your turn. Triple Tactics Talent is hands down a main worthy Yu-Gi-Oh card, especially if your opponent decides to go on the more hand trap approach. This card has so many good uses. Enemy Controller is technically considered a take card, but you gotta tribute one of your monsters. Ew. I think in certain situations it can be good, but it's even more situational than the situational cards. And for the last cards, Book of Moon does trade 1-for-1, but can also be used proactively in a correct deck. So I'm going to say situational. Book of Eclipse does not trade 1-for-1. It actually does crazy. So I'm going to say good card. And the Black Goat Slavs, I think the Black Goat is also a pretty good card. And overall, that's my take on both the hand traps and the board breakers. Big Dog Hoodley, go ahead and show them what the hand trap tier list looks like. I think that this is perfect for anybody getting into the game and wants to play it safe, but also giving you some options to be a little bit more aggressive. As for the board breakers, I think that this is pretty much set in stone. I don't expect anything to change too much with the board breaking cards. And of course, Big Dog, again, if you like these type of videos, go ahead and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date. And also be sure to check out these videos so I can catch you on the next one.